Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something really specific, really fascinating in biblical translation.
That's right.
It's called the Urim Thummim version, the UTV.
hmm
And our mission really is to unpack what makes it so different. Because understanding its choices, well, it gives you a shortcut to seeing the hidden decisions behind any translation you might pick up.
Absolutely. It throws those choices into sharp relief.
So let's dive in. Now, usually when we talk biblical translation, people think of like two extremes, right?
Yeah, two main poles.
On one end, you've got formal equivalence, word for word.
Right. They're literal. Think King James Version, maybe. The idea is sticking super close to the original words, the grammar, even the word order.
Okay, so what's the upside there? What does that give the reader?
Well, the main advantage is you get closer to the mechanics of the original language. You can see the structure, the untranslated idioms, maybe rhetorical flourishes. It preserves that raw data, so to speak.
But it can sound a bit clunky in English sometimes.
It definitely can, yeah. That's the trade-off.
And the other end of the spectrum.
That's dynamic equivalence or functional equivalence. More thought for thought.
So less about the individual words, more about the overall meaning.
Exactly. The goal is conveying the message so it lands with a modern reader the same way it might have landed with the original audience. It aims for naturalness, fluency. Really useful for idioms that just don't make sense literally.
Okay, so word for word versus thought for thought.
Well, yes, but it's crucial to remember it's not really binary. It's more like a sliding scale. Every single translation makes choices about where to sit on that scale, what to prioritize.
Right. It's a continuum. Which brings us to the UTV, because its story, the origin, is pretty unique. This wasn't some big committee project.
Not at all. This was Dallas James's personal work. We're talking over 50 years of translation effort.
50 years. And he started with the KJV as a base, but then something shifted.
That's the key point. He developed this really strong conviction about a different source text being, quote, more original.
And that text was?
The Septuagint, the LXX.
The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Why lean on that?
Well, his reasoning was influenced by a really obscure Bible from 1808, the Charles Thompson Bible, which was itself an English translation of the Septuagint.
Wow. Okay, so that's layers of interpretation already.
It is, and it shows this was a very personal, theologically driven path. It wasn't about following mainstream scholarship necessarily, but about this particular historical strand he valued. Very different from, say, the NIV or ESV process.
So this unique origin story, this focus on the Septuagint via Thompson, how does it actually show up in the UTV text? This is where it gets really interesting, right? These linguistic choices.
Oh, absolutely. You see what's described as a kind of theologically driven formal equivalence?
Okay, unpack that. What's an example?
We'll look at the divine names. The UTV consistently uses transliterations like Elohim and YHWH.
Instead of God or Lord like in the KJV or many others.
Exactly. That's a hyperliteral choice. It's prioritizing the original Hebrew form and sound, embedding it right there.
That definitely feels formal, almost academic. What else?
The term age-lasting.
Instead of everlasting or eternal.
Right. This is a big one theologically. It translates the Hebrew olam or Greek aionios in a way that suggests a specific long age or era rather than absolute endlessness.
Yeah.
It reflects a particular view on, well, final things.
Okay, so the word choice itself carries a distinct theological weight.
Definitely. And then there's the vocabulary like using engendered consistently.
Like begat in the KJV.
Sort of, yeah. It adds to this very formal, somewhat archaic feel throughout the whole text. It maintains that distance, that sense of antiquity.
Okay, so lots of formal, literal choices.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned some curveballs, things that seem less strictly formal.
Yeah, there are these moments that lean more interpretive or even, you could say, dynamic. For instance, using cosmos.
Where other Bibles might say world or heaven.
Correct. Cosmos carries a slightly different, maybe more philosophical flavor. And then there's the language around sex.
Yes, I saw that. It uses phrases like sexually possessed or sexual relations.
Which is strikingly direct, isn't it? Especially compared to the older, more euphemistic new.
Much more direct, kind of jarring against the archaic tone elsewhere.
It is. That seems like a functional choice, prioritizing clarity over, perhaps, traditional sensibility there.
Any other interpretive moves like that?
Well, sometimes adding clarifying words,
Yeah.
like specifying supernatural fire for the burning bush, The supernatural isn't strictly in the original word, but it interprets the nature of the fire for the reader.
Adding an explicit layer of meaning.
And sometimes a hybrid approach, like rendering a phrase as divine ones, Elohim. It keeps the Hebrew transliteration, but adds a direct interpretation in parentheses.
Okay, that's interesting. And what about this Urim Thummim stone insertion you mentioned in Genesis?
Ah, yes, Genesis 49.24, the UTV adds this phrase. From there comes the shepherd with the Urim Thummim stone of Israel.
That's not usually there, is it?
No. The Urim and Thummim were objects used later, like by the high priest, for discerning God's will. Inserting it back into Genesis is a significant interpretive move by the translator, James.
So he's connecting the dots, theologically, right within the verse itself.
Precisely. It shows he's not just translating words, he's embedding his understanding of the larger theological narrative directly into the text. It's quite bold.
So pulling it all together, where does the UTV land on that translation spectrum we talked about?
Well, it's clearly rooted on the formal equivalence side. You see that in the transliterations, the archaic words like engendered.
But with those interpretive twists.
Exactly. That's why theologically driven formal equivalence seems like a good description. It's formal, but the formality serves and is sometimes bent by the translator's specific theological convictions. It's like a chef who insists on traditional methods, that's the formal part, but very deliberately highlights certain spices to create a very specific flavor profile he intends.
That's a great analogy. It's controlled, but with a definite interpretive goal. Okay, so who is this translation for? Why should you, listening, care about this deep dive?
Well, the UTV offers a very particular reading experience. It's probably for someone deeply interested in seeing those original divine names preserved, or someone curious about the Septuagint's influence through that specific Thompson lens.
Or maybe someone who wants a translation that wears its specific theological interpretations on its sleeve.
That too. It's not trying to be a neutral consensus text. It's upfront about its perspective, which is embedded in these choices.
And I think understanding how James made these choices, why age-lasting, why insert the Urim Thummim stone, it highlights how every translation, even the ones on your shelf, involves choices that shape meaning.
Absolutely. None are perfectly neutral windows. They're interpretations.
So maybe the final thought for you is, knowing this, how does it make you think about the translations you use? What are their hidden choices? And what do you actually want to prioritize when you engage with these texts? What are you looking for in your own quest for knowledge? Good question to ponder.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Urim Thummim version. Definitely something to think about.
Indeed.
We hope you'll explore further, maybe even pull up some different translations side by side yourself. Until next time.